This is Yaron and Jody from Montesson Holistic Clinic. We hear a lot about the dangers of things like cell phones, Wi-Fi, and dirty electricity, but many of us don't understand why we need to worry about it. Today, you're going to learn what exactly is EMF, what it does to human health, and practical ways to live and benefit from technology without wrapping yourself in tinfoil. Our guest today is a highly respected and experienced electrical engineer who programmed computers that controlled power plants in Canada and the US for 9 years. He is a certified biology electromagnetic radiation specialist, a chief EMF consultant at Elexana, New York City's EMF EMI testing and consulting service, a much sought after lecturer on the subject of EMF, and is the founder of EMF Aware, a company that specializes in EMF Home Assessments in order to help people use their technology in healthier ways. Yaron and I are thrilled to have Mitch Marchand with us today. Welcome, Mitch.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk about, have conversations about the EMFs and how it affects people. So my pleasure.
So first of all, can you tell us exactly what is EMF? And then maybe you can tell us how you got into being an EMF specialist.
Yeah, like many people who kind of fall into the rabbit hole of electromagnetic fields or EMFs, usually has to do with health challenges personally or health challenges of a loved one. And for me, when my wife moved into a 600 square foot condo with me in downtown Calgary, Canada, she started feeling not well. She felt like her body was being jolted awake at night, and she was getting these chronic infections. And she is a licensed naturopathic doctor here in Canada, and so she was running all these hormone panel tests, all the tests that she had available. Nothing was really popping, and nothing was helping. So when she actually brought home an electromagnetic field meter based on some environmental medicine training that she remembered taking, she thought maybe it was the new clinic she moved into at about the same time. So she took it to the clinic, everything checked out there. Then she brought it home, and the readings were just off the charts. So 2 weeks later, we were in a new place, and her symptoms went completely away.
Wow.
So as an electrical engineer at the time, I was thinking about this and how this all works, and decided to take the deep dive, taking some building biology courses, and just learning more about this. And the more I learned about it, the more passionate I got about it. And so I've been now doing home assessments for over 8.5 years for people's homes, businesses, and so on. So yeah, so that's kind of how I fell into it. And as far as what are electromagnetic fields, an analogy I like to use is with sound. People understand that sound has different frequencies. A higher frequency would be a higher pitch sound, a lower frequency would be a lower pitch sound. And when we talk about electromagnetic frequencies, we're talking about it's basically electricity or wireless technology, and they operate at quite a wide variety of different frequencies. So they start off at 0 frequency or 0 hertz, and that's basically like the DC magnetic field of the earth. That's how compasses work and operate. As we increase up to 60 hertz, or 50 hertz, that's what electricity is flowing in and around us at. And then as we increase even further, we get into some of the wireless technologies like AM, FM radio, wireless Wi-Fi, cell phones, smart meters. Then we get into the millimeter and 5G technologies. And then we start entering into something called ionizing radiation, which includes gamma rays, alpha rays, cosmic rays, and nuclear type of exposures. So all those things are called electromagnetic fields. They're called electromagnetic radiation. They're also called, electrosmog, and electropollution. And those are just kind of the general catch-all terms. Then we can kind of dive into the different types inside of there. So yeah, that's kind of just a general rundown of what electromagnetic fields are. include light as well. Light is a natural form of electromagnetic fields as well. So
yeah, actually there are several natural forms of EMF, right, that are beneficial for us.
yeah, you know, it includes everything from the DC field of the Earth. There's Schumann resonance, which is the natural resonance, the natural oscillations of the magnetic and electric fields of the Earth due to lightning storms around the planet. So, you know, those, if we're shielded from those in an environment, for example, they've done studies where they go down into the earth, they make these shielded rooms down in the earth, it sets off our circadian rhythms go out of whack within almost 24 hours of being disconnected from that. So, you know, other natural forms are, you know, if you just sit next to a waterfall, for example, it has a high negative ion count, and that has a calming effect on people, versus when a thunderstorm rolls in, there's a high positive ion count in the atmosphere, and that creates agitation in people, animals. You may know as dogs start barking and those type of things. And then there's light, which is a natural form as well. A lot of people don't think of it as electromagnetic field, but that it is an electromagnetic field. So those are the primary natural forms.
Do the non-native or man-made EMF block us from the natural beneficial EMF?
A lot of the, when it comes to our body operates at it's a bioelectric system, right? And it works on very low levels of electricity and chemistry, and there's very subtle signals. And what we're being exposed to historically, maybe I'll just take a step back. The sun basically emits all frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the magnetic field of the earth helps shield us from a lot of those. So when we look at the electromagnetic field spectrum, there used to be this window where there was nothing or very little, and that was because it was being shielded from the magnetic field of the earth. So this is sometimes called the radio frequency window, and basically nothing existed there. And us as humans have created these non-native EMFs that have populated that, including electricity, AM, FM radio, and all the wireless technologies. So those didn't actually naturally occur, you know, 2 or 3 generations ago. There was nothing, right? Electricity used to be used for lighting, and now it's used for much more. So it's actually expanded the exposure from almost nothing to very little amounts to very significant amounts. And the amount that it's actually increased is, you know, it's like 1 with 18 zeros at the end of it. It's called 1 quintillion times in certain frequency bands, which is, you know, it's huge. And when we look at the subtle energies that our body uses, it's just being dwarfed by our external environment, and that just is creating some bioelectric noise in our body, and has some physiological effects because of that.
About dirty electricity and from the electrical appliances, wiring in our homes.
Yeah. So yeah, there's basically 4 main types of human-generated or non-native electromagnetic fields that we look at. One of them is simply just wireless technology, which is electricity that's sent through the air, essentially. Then we have 3 types that we typically look at when we look at the electricity and how it flows in and around people's homes. So I'll explain the dirty electricity last, because the electric field and magnetic field of the electricity component fall into what dirty electricity is. So the example I use is somebody just plugging in a lamp into a wall. When you do that, there's electrical pressure up to the on-off switch. Even though the lamp is off, there's electrical pressure to that on-off switch. And that electrical pressure is called voltage. And that voltage, wherever there's voltage, AC voltage, it creates an electric field 6 to 10 feet away from that energized wire. So even though the lamp is off, there's an electric field that gets emitted from the lamp cord. And what happens, our body or anything conductive, including our body, when it's within 6 to 10 feet, there's a voltage induced on the surface of our skin. So this voltage is typically 1.2 volts AC in people's sleeping areas, for example, or higher. And our cells inside of our body work at, 80 millivolts, 120 millivolts, 40 millivolts, somewhere in that range. And these numbers are at like 1200 millivolts or higher. So it adds this bioelectric noise on our body. So that's the effect of the electrical pressure that's always present in an energized environment. Now, when we turn on the lamp, there's now a flow of electricity up to the light bulb that turns the light bulb on, and a flow of electricity back down. There's usually 2 wires in a lamp cord. Now, that flow of electricity creates what's called a magnetic field. And a magnetic field can expand between different ranges. Sometimes it's really close to the source, other times it expands really far away. In the case of a lamp cord, the current is in equal and opposite directions. So the current going up to the lamp is equal to the current returning from the lamp, and there's there's basically hardly any magnetic field that's created from that. But if you have wiring errors or something like that in your home, the magnetic field can expand quite far into the home. And what it does in the body is it induces a 60 hertz current inside the body, which is unnatural. And that 60 hertz current creates some more bioelectric noise in the body. Now, when we're talking specifically about dirty electricity, the dirty electricity is noisy electric and magnetic fields. So what that does is it creates noisy body voltage on the surface of our skin and noisy induced currents inside of us. So our body, when it sees noisy signals, it's more biologically harmful. It's more biologically annoying to the body. Our body likes to see perfect sinusoidal waves with no bumps on it, kind of like a smooth roller coaster, but this electrical noise causes these bumps in what would be like the roller coaster. And our body reacts quite strongly to very small amounts of this. So the dirty electricity is just this electrical noise on your system. It's just like when you're listening to an AM radio station during a lightning storm, right? You hear the lightning comes in and it creates this noise. That's the same thing that's happening on your body.
So does that mean that as much that we have more electricity, electronic appliance in the house, we will be more exposed in general?
Yeah, so when it comes to dirty electricity, kind of what happens is this noise gets created by different things, right? It gets created by compact fluorescent lights or LED lights, for example. So LED lights and compact fluorescent lights, there's a flicker to them. So they turn on and off really rapidly to save energy. And that on and off, turning on and off creates electrical noise, right? Other things that create electrical noise is sometimes basically anything with a circuit board in it, whether it be the LCD display on your microwave oven or your stove or on your alarm clock or your computer, anything with a circuit board in it requires DC electricity, or basically the same thing that batteries produce. But what comes into your home is AC electricity. And that conversion process from AC electricity to DC electricity can create dirty electricity as well. So, we see it in computers a lot, in TVs. Plasma TVs are a little worse than the LCD ones. There's dimmer switches that can create dirty electricity. Solar systems on solar panels and the inverters associated with them can create dirty electricity. Electric car chargers we've seen. So all these type of devices just add to the electrical noise. And sometimes it comes off from the grid, from the electrical company as well. Or from a neighbor, for example, anybody on the same transformer as you, typically you're sharing the dirty electricity potentially. So yeah, those are kind of that's why it's there. And even with energy saving appliances, depending on how they're made, they're switching on and off to save electricity, and they could be creating some dirty electricity as well. Some manufacturers have started putting in dirty electricity filtering inside of like LED light bulbs now, and those type of things. So they're starting to come around, but it's kind of hit or miss, which brands and which models and everything else. So
can you explain to us the difference between Wi-Fi and cellular networks?
Yeah. So Wi-Fi is typically found in homes and businesses, and the way that it transmits is, if you were to hear what Wi-Fi sounds like, it sounds like sounds like a helicopter, and those dits are the actual network ID that gets sent out. So it does 10 dits per second. So it sends out the network ID at 10 hertz continuously 24/7, and that's a pulsed signal. So there are pulsed wireless signals, and there are analog wireless signals. So for example, your microwave oven, when you put in something into the microwave oven, it operates at 2.45 gigahertz. And what it does is when it turns on, it's vibrating the water molecules 2.45 billion times a second to create friction and to heat up. And it's inside of a shielded cage, or should be, and it has no information on that signal. It's just a pure 2.45 gigahertz frequency, and so that heats up your food. When we look at your Wi-Fi, one of the bands of Wi-Fi is 2.4 gigahertz. Okay, and how it operates is it's sending out that network ID 10 times a second at 10 hertz, and that is information that it's sending on top of the 2.4 gigahertz signal. So just like I was saying, that smooth roller coaster is not as harmful as a bumpy one. So basically what it does is it sends a network ID as a series of ones and zeros through pulses at 10 times a second. And the pulses is what's biologically more harmful for us than a pure analog signal. So just an example, a microwave oven we're allowed 10 times more exposure to than a Wi-Fi router because it doesn't have any information on it. And that's from the European environmental medicine doctors. So this Wi-Fi router is transmitting 24/7 its network ID, and then if someone connects to it, it's sending information on top of that. But it's a 24/7 exposure versus the microwave oven is only when you use it. And so when we compare the 24/7 constant exposure from a Wi-Fi router, when we look at a cellular network, for example, when you turn on your cellular phone, and let's just assume right now that you don't have Bluetooth, or your Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are turned off. We're just going to talk about a cellular network. When you turn on your cell phone, what happens is your cell phone will start up, and it's going to try to reach out to the available cell towers that are in its area. And it does that using a fairly strong signal because it's trying to even get the ones that are far out. And what it does is it establishes a connection to the closest cell tower to you, and then it also tries to figure out what other cell towers are nearby as well. So in the case that you're moving in a vehicle, it knows where to switch off to. So what happens after a period of 2, 3, 4 minutes is your cell phone says, okay, I know where I'm at, I know what cell tower I'm connected to, and then it kind of does this intermittent connection. Maybe once every 30 seconds, it'll make sure that it still has the connection, and it connects in and out, in and out. So, so your cell phone connection isn't a constant connection like with Wi-Fi. So, you know, there's a little bit less exposure, but the device is much closer to you, right? So with anything, whether it be a cordless phone, a Wi-Fi router, a cell phone, an FM radio, TV broadcast tower, or a smart speaker, or a Bluetooth, every time you double your distance away from the source, your exposure reduces 4 times, so 400%. So distance with wireless technology is a very effective way to reduce your exposure. The difference between having it up to your head and 3 feet away from you for a cell phone has a reduction of up to 50-fold. So it's huge. So when you turn on your Wi-Fi, for example, so your phone has multiple cell phone frequencies in it that it can talk to the different cell towers. It also has Wi-Fi. So if you have the Wi-Fi on, right, it's transmitting Wi-Fi and receiving. So that's another source. It has Bluetooth in it, which is another source. It can receive signals from using the GPS part of the phone. That is not a transmitter. That does not increase your exposure. It's receiving only the signal from the GPS satellites. It's not transmitting. So yeah, when it comes to the cellular phones, it is a significant exposure. One, because it's mostly close to people, and two, it has several transmitters in it as well. So it's the transmitters that and the distance between you and the transmitters is what causes the increased exposure.
Mitch, I'm trying to understand more clearly for myself. And what you're actually saying is that the phone, the mobile phone that we carry on us, this is the source of the transmission, or the source of the harm. So if I would not have any phone, but around me there will be millions of other towers and other people with phone, but it wouldn't be on me or around me or whatever, would I still be exposed to the cellular network?
Yes, they are still exposed, but for example, you know, having a phone, you know, just within 3 feet of you, most likely is going to be your highest exposure. What we find in people's homes is we reduce their exposure by over 80% just by reducing with what's within their control. That's the Wi-Fi router, the cordless phones, the cell phones, and those type of things. So most of your exposure is from inside your home. You know, I get calls all the time about, you know, the cell tower that's, you know, 200, 300, 400 meters away, right? And that's their main concern. We go into the home and a majority of their exposure is from the Wi-Fi router that's in the room just below their bed, right? Their sleeping area, right? Or it's the printer that has a Wi-Fi capability in it that's in the room next door, and it just, you know, it acts like a Wi-Fi router, most Wi-Fi printers, right? So most of the time we find that people's exposures are drastically reduced with what's inside their control. And it's usually 80% or more. So by having your phone even near you, you're going to increase that exposure, right, significantly than versus having it off in most cases. Obviously, if there's a cell tower right outside your window or something like that, that's not the case. But most people are, you know, 200, 300, 400 meters away at least from a cell tower. Ideally, you'd be over a kilometer, but anything within a kilometer is going to start raising your ambient levels of cell towers. And the other thing with cell towers is your exposure is not just based on distance from a cell tower. It's based on several factors. So one of the factors is if your line of sight to a cell tower, that's generally not a good thing if you can actually see it. Then, but it also depends on how many antennas, how many of those long rectangles are on the actual structure, and if they're pointing towards you. If you're in between and they're pointing kind of away from you, your exposure is much less than if you're directly in front of one of them. The example I use is I did an assessment of a home that was in a valley, and on the edge of their property they had a cell tower, but the tower was pointing up and down the valley, and they were just at right angles to it. So they were 50 meters away or less, but their exposure was absolutely nothing because the antennas were pointing up and down the valley to increase the maximum coverage of those towers. So it's not just based on distance. It's not based on, you know, line of sight. It's how many antennas and how close, and if they're pointing towards you. You know, if you have big trees or earth in between you and the tower, that helps shield from the signal quite a bit. So there's lots of factors when it comes to cell towers and what your exposure is. But inside your home, everything's so much closer to you, right? Yeah, there could be mirrors or certain things that are reflecting the signal around, but it's usually the stuff inside your home that has the biggest impact on you.
Mirrors?
Mirrors are basically a polished piece of metal, right? So it actually reflects radio frequencies. Mirrors, yeah. So it's you know, sometimes we come into situations where the mirrors are helping or hindering or increasing your exposure based on the placement of them. It's not very common, but it's just an example.
Can I ask you, if you were talking about the possible damage about having your mobile phone close to you. If you put the mobile phone on an airplane mode, for example, would it make a difference on how much damage it would do?
Right, yeah. So in theory, when you put your phone into airplane mode, it turns off all the transmitters. So that is a safe mode to have it in. With Apple products specifically, it's getting more and more complicated because when we put the phone in airplane mode, in some cases, it doesn't actually turn off the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi. So when you put your phone into airplane mode, always go to the Gear app or the Settings app and check that it shows Bluetooth off and Wi-Fi off. If it shows disconnected for Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, the transmitter is still searching. It's just not connecting to a network. So it is actually still transmitting a signal. So it's always something we ask our clients to do is show me how you put your phone in airplane mode. And it's about 25% of the phones don't actually turn off the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi when you put it into airplane mode. So it's just something to look out for.
But when you, let's say that you do follow this instruction, you make sure the Wi-Fi is off, the Bluetooth is off, and you put an airplane mode, would it still be considered as a dangerous device to be somewhere in your room?
No. It's pretty benign at that point. It's running off battery. You know, if you're charging your device, there's a small amount of electromagnetic fields that could be generated when you're charging your device next to your nightstand while you sleep. But if your phone is in airplane mode, and it is in airplane mode properly, it's not emitting any wireless signal, and it should be emitting very little or no electrical and magnetic fields from it as well. Yeah.
And what about, well, we just found out that Israel is planning to roll out 5G in the next couple of years. So can you talk a little bit about what the difference between what we have now, like 3 and 4G and 5G, how they'll affect us?
Yeah, so 1G was analog cell phones. That was the first generation, the big brick cell phones. 2G allowed us to send text messages back and forth over phones. 3G allowed us to actually connect to the internet and look at web pages. And 4G essentially allows us to download videos in real time, stream videos over the cellular network. So 5G stands for 5th generation. It's kind of like saying, you know, beer. There's many types of beer, and with 5G, there's many different types of implementations of the 5G technology. Some of them are going to look very similar to the existing cellular and 4G technologies. There might be a little slight improvement, but they're using the same frequencies. They're just using a slightly more complex algorithm. The algorithm will probably be more pulsed, more compression, more ones and zeros are being sent. So chances are it's going to be just as biologically harmful as the 4G, but a lot of people are suspecting that it's going to be more pulsed. So it means that it'll probably be more biologically harmful. So what 5G is not is if you're trying to search for a Wi-Fi network and you see, you know, it has 5G at the end of the wireless network, that stands for 5 gigahertz. That's the second band of Wi-Fi, and it's been around since 2009. So that's nothing that's not a new source. I'm not saying it's healthy. it's still harmful, but when people are focusing on 5G, they say, oh, if I can log on to my computer and I can see 5G networks everywhere. Well, that's just a 5 gigahertz. That's just a second band of Wi-Fi. It's not 5G. So 5G is going to, first, it typically gets rolled out on cell towers, and it can be in a low band, which is existing cell phone frequencies, a medium band, which is about where Wi-Fi is and slightly higher, up to 6 gigahertz. And then there's a millimeter band. And the millimeter band is what the 5G gets all the publicity about, is the self-driving cars, downloading movies in seconds, and those type of things. So those are at really high frequencies, a whole order of magnitude higher than what they are. Wi-Fi right now and cell phones work between 600 and 3000 megahertz. The millimeter waves are going to be in the tens of thousands of megahertz. So when we get into that range, when we increase the frequency, it increases the energy, but it decreases the distance in which it can transmit at. So the example I use is, you can pick up usually an FM radio station in the city or town that you're in, but you can't pick up an FM radio station, 500 or 600 kilometers away. Versus you can usually pick up an AM radio station much further away, and sometimes at night you can pick it up, thousands of kilometers away, depending on the reception. And the AM radio is at a lower frequency, so it can travel further, versus the FM radio is at a higher frequency and can't travel as far. So with the 5G millimeter waves, it means that they're either going to have to increase the power output or increase the exposure, or put them closer together. So, and that's the whole, that's one of the major concerns of the 5G, is it's not replacing something, it's adding a whole other layer of wireless technology on top of what we have. And they have to be spaced closer together, which means every time you double the distance from something, or if you have the distance, you increase your exposure 400%. So it's going to be increasing the exposure of the environment quite significantly with the 5G. And they're selling it on self-driving cars and increased speed, but I'm not sure if anyone's asking off the cellular network to be downloading movies in seconds, right? And self-driving cars, they don't need an interconnected wireless system to do that, right? They have machine vision built into a lot of these cars, where they can sense cars on either side of them. They have adaptive cruise control, which slows down the vehicle when it comes up to another vehicle, right? So there's machine vision that can be built into vehicles for self-driving cars, instead of relying on this external wireless network. So when it comes down to kind of the driving factors, if you pull back the curtain a little bit, is with 5G, with more antennas, they'll be able to pinpoint locations much easier. And locations is a big part of data when they sell it back to advertisers. So it's about collecting more information and more data off of people, and that's where these companies are going to be making a lot of money, is on the on selling data. It's going to be just like 4G plus for when it rolls out on the cellular ones, and then when it rolls out on the millimeter wave thing, that's a whole other thing, and that's going to increase exposures quite drastically.
Mitch, we are going to be equally damaged by the 5G if we do use a mobile phone and if we don't. Like if I decide I don't have a mobile phone and I'm just walking around in the streets in an area which probably there will be more towers and more things, is my exposure and damage is equal as if I do have or I don't have a phone?
Yeah, good question. What happens is, when we get into the millimeter waves, is they use what's called beamforming technology. So they have multiple arrays of antennas, and they focus multiple signals towards the device. Let's say a 5G phone, for example. So a 5G phone can run off the cellular network, which is just like 4G plus, or if it actually connects to a millimeter 5G system, then there is a beam forming, a very concentrated form of electromagnetic radiation coming from the tower to the actual device. And it is literally a beam. So if there's something in between that beam, right, the 5G antenna will just increase the power output to move through that, whatever obstacle. So, you know, there's different reports out there of how this beam, it's at a higher frequency, it won't even penetrate a wall of a home or a window, right? But Verizon in the US have demonstrated that it can. So there's some conflicting information about it. But with the beam forming technology, if you don't have a 5G device, you won't be getting the beam forming millimeter wave towards you. So the idea is that the more sophisticated 5G phones, right, will have the millimeter receiver transmitter in it and a 4G or the cellular antenna on it. So it's going to be using the cellular antenna most of the time. When you want to download a video, that's when it's going to enact the beam forming part of it, and that use just a beam forming for when the video needs to be downloaded. So that's in general what the general thought is on how the technology is going to work. Did that answer your question?
And yes, and yes, and I need some clarification.
Sure.
Here in Israel, we come with a country which our army is mandatory and we're all being down. So we think in a matter of like army equipment and stuff. So when I imagine like the tower here and the phone here, and the tower is beaming toward my phone some kind of frequency, I don't know exactly what is it beaming, something. And there will be people standing between the tower and me with the phone. And let's say I don't have a phone, but Jody has a phone, she's standing here, she's holding the phone, I'm here, the tower is here, and it's beaming to her phone. Does it passing through me? Does it affecting me just because Jody is holding the phone and I'm somewhere in between?
Yeah, so it's what the actual 5G system does is it tries to adjust for obstacles, right? So they've tested this out in urban areas with skyscrapers and buildings and a person out on the street. And what they do is the 5G antenna will look for the strongest signal out of its whole array at shooting it off at various different angles. So sometimes it'll bounce it off of a skyscraper or a lowy glass window and try to find the best signal. And it doesn't care what direction it's going, it just wants the best signal to the device. So, you know, if there is, you know, if you're across the street from a 5G antenna and a big metal moving truck pulls up in front of you, right, it's probably going to try to redirect the angle of that beam to bounce off something to still maintain the connection. So it's quite a complex system, but that's the idea of it. Yeah. But if it can't do that, you know, it might just boost the signal and try to, you know, as you increase the intensity, it'll go through more things, right? Or a percentage of the signal will pass through.
Is there alternative form that we can use in a modern world with a 5G net of whatever net it will be with causing less damage?
So there's an interesting startup called Modita, and they're out of Finland, and they have, it's called a minimalist cell phone is kind of how they're marketing it. And their device is supposed to have an ultra low radiation. Sometimes phones are measured in something called SAR, specific absorption. And it's going to have, they've tested it, prototypes of it, and it has an ultra low SAR rating on it. And the phone doesn't have a lot of features. I think it'll allow you to text message. It has no internet browser, but it's just a minimalist cell phone. It's a phone, right? It's not a mini computer, and it's just interesting because it's low SAR, and it allows you to have text messages and those type of things, but it doesn't allow a lot of other stuff. So that's kind of one that's kind of built to be kind of a low EMF phone. Other ones, if you have a smartphone, it's going to have Wi-Fi, it's going to have Bluetooth, right? And you have to manage all those settings in there. In all the phones, you usually have the ability to switch which network you're on. So you can go from a 4G network or an LTE network to a 3G network.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go from LTE to 4G or 3G even, you reduce your exposure by up to 80%. So that's what we show people when we go into clients' homes, is we optimize their phone settings to have the lowest amount of radiation. So all that means is you have a slower connection to the internet when you're out using the cellular network, which means you won't be able to download movies very fast. Most people don't need that capability, right? But it's still a way to minimize the exposure.
Well, that 80%, that's good. Excellent.
That's significant. Yeah, it's huge.
Very significant. And I had forgotten about that. But most people that we deal with, they feel fine. We tell them about 5G and dirty electricity, and they feel okay. They're not like your wife, who's very sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
What is the effect of all of this technology on our bodies, even if you're not feeling it immediately?
Yeah, so just at a high level, it's basically just a stress on your body, right? And the analogy I usually use is, some people can eat potato chips day in and day out and they're skinny as a rail, right? And other people feel like when they look at potato chips, they get fat, right? So, everyone has a different constitution. Even if someone is eating potato chips, a lot of potato chips, and they're still skinny, it's still having a stress on their body, right? It's still affecting them on some level, even if based on their constitution, it doesn't show externally, right? And same with these electromagnetic fields, whether or not you feel it or not, it is a stress on your body. And one of the kind of, there's everything from increased calcium influx in the body, mitochondrial dysfunction. It can mean increased oxidative stress. And when we look at explaining this to people, the oxidative stress one is the one that we usually use to just describe this in general. It doesn't matter if it's dirty electricity, radio frequencies, electric fields, magnetic fields, they all increase your oxidative stress. So, and it does it in two ways. It's an oxidative agent, so it is increasing the free radicals in your body. Free radicals are used for signaling and stuff like that, and they're good on a short term. But if you get a long-term exposure, like the 24/7 exposure from a Wi-Fi or cordless phone, right? This long-term exposure is not good. So it increases the oxidative agent, which increases the free radicals, but it also decreases the antioxidant, the enzymes that create antioxidants in your body as well. So it kind of hits you from both sides. So when we're looking at it, one of the studies is from Yakomenko in 2015, and it has 17 in vitro studies, 4 studies on humans, and 71 studies on plants and animals showing increased oxidative stress based on radio frequency exposures. So it's affecting plants, animals, humans, and in the lab when we look at in test tubes. So, and when you look at what's the effect of oxidative stress, the list goes on from different cancers to what is it here? Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, chronic fatigue, inflammation, high blood pressure, infertility, arthritis, asthma, dermatitis, sexual dysfunction, retinal damage, aging, heart attacks, strokes. It just goes on and on and on. And those are all, everyone knows, in the medical community what oxidative stress does. They just haven't made the link of oxidative stress can be caused by electromagnetic fields. So that's kind of the general way that we describe it. When you talk about certain people feel it and certain people don't, what affects everybody is, so there's kind of three general categories of illness created by electromagnetic fields. One is cancer, one has to do with fertility, and the other one has to do with electrically hypersensitive people or the neurological and hormonal systems. So those are kind of the three categories. The first two affect everybody. Increased cancers, you know, whether it be leukemia, breast cancer, brain cancer, increased tumors of the heart, of the brain, where on the side that you use your cell phone, there's increased brain tumors, tumor of the acoustic neuroma, and tumors of the saliva gland, right? For people, for women who put their cell phones in their bra, you know, they've seen increased breast cancer right over those positions. So everyone's affected by this. You know, there's been the NTP study came out, the Ramazzini study replicated it, showing that, you know, cell phones increase, you know, tumors of the heart and tumor of the brain. So these are based on, you know, sometimes it's as little as 45 minutes a day of exposure for 10 years type of thing. So most people are exposed to more than that with these. So, and then when we get into the fertility, you know, there's over 200 studies on the effects of sperm virility and sperm damage for people who have a cell phone close to them. Typically, if men put it in their front pocket, it's been studied lots, and then there's no doubt that cell phones actually affect sperm virility. And there is, you know, there's a huge increase of couples having more and more problems conceiving with this. There's more studies coming out about behavioral issues for the moms who have been using cell phones while they're pregnant, and those type of things. And then there's the electrically hypersensitive category, or the neurological and hormone portion, where melatonin production decreases. There is, you know, certain symptoms of Parkinson's and MS are exacerbated under certain EMF conditions. There's even been studies of increasing blood sugar levels, such as diabetes, in high EMF environments. And the list goes on and on and on. And these are peer-reviewed studies. This isn't you know, anything that's manufactured. You know, 70% of the independent studies out there show a negative biological effect, versus 70% of the industry-funded studies show no biological effect.
Surprise.
So it's based on, yeah, it's no surprise. They've done studies on this, you know, numerous times in different industries, and whoever's paying for the study has an influence on the outcome, right? So it's part of human nature. So
Mitch, I would like to, I think we can kind of agree that EMF in all the form is not very beneficial for us, generally. But yeah. I guess there would be some people who will be more influenced than others. And I was wondering if people have electro-hypersensitivity, how they can identify that this is the condition? Like, how do they know, oh, this is really dangerous for me, or this is really affecting me, as opposed to the general public?
Yeah, so so Dr. Magna Havas not that long ago came out with a little video, and just a simple, dead simple way to have a good indication if someone's electrically hypersensitive is just ask them how they feel about compact fluorescent lights. So in her research and some other research that she's looked at, about 80% of the people who are electrically hypersensitive have a negative effect with compact fluorescent lights. It's actually the corkscrew fluorescent lights.
Oh,
those
not
ones
the long
there.
ones.
Right,
Okay.
the corkscrew ones. And so some people get rashes when they're under it. Some people get headaches. Some people get fogginess of brain. you know, there's this whole nondescript set of symptoms that are related to electrically hypersensitive people.
How fast would it demonstrate, and how close do they need to be to it in order to check it?
Yeah, so if they've been in and around any compact fluorescence, like, you know, the typical example is a lamp right next to a reading chair, for example. You know, that would be a pretty good example of a good test exposure. So, you know, there's that. There's, you know, there's, when it comes to if they have Lyme disease, for example, if they have any immune condition, they may become more electrically hypersensitive. People who are chemically sensitive often become electrically hypersensitive as well. There are people who have been struck by lightning or have had an electrical shock significant are often electrically hypersensitive. And those are just kind of the ones that are coming to mind. Oh, and heavy metals. So if they have mercury amalgams, or if they have heavy metals, if you test them for heavy metals in their body and they have heavy metals, they tend to more likely than not have some sort of sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. So usually when we look at these type of things, it's a matter of reducing their exposure in their home and then working with medical professionals to boost their immune system, to detox. And then there's also an emotional component to some of the more extreme cases of electric hypersensitivity as well, where they might need some emotional support as well.
Any research linking ADHD with EMF exposure?
When you ask some people who deal with like environmental medicine or some people who deal with the most difficult cases, one example is Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. Mm-hmm. He did a pilot study. It was 10 healthy kids, 10 kids with autism. They went back to the actual homes where the kids were conceived and were measuring the electromagnetic fields. And the electromagnetic fields in the kids with autism it was like 50 or it was quite significantly higher than the ones that didn't have autism. And what Dr. Klinghardt finds is there is kids with autism that get better with sanitation of EMFs, basically reduce all EMFs in their environment, and there's kids that don't. So it's kind of a mixed bag. There's a Dr. Toril Gelter who has a protocol, and her protocol for kids with autism is to turn off the cordless phones, turn off the baby monitors, turn off the Wi-Fi, and turn off the power to their room. And 80% of those kids with autism show significant improvement within 2 weeks.
Wow. Wow, that's
something everyone could do tonight, right? To test. It doesn't require any investment whatsoever. So the only caveat that I say is if you're turning off the breaker to somebody's room, just make sure that the smoke detector works, the carbon monoxide detector, your fridge, your furnace. But it's a really simple tool that's really effective. And I think I think that works not just only for kids with autism, but I think it works for the general public as well as just a general catch-all, general recommendations. The only one I'd add to that is put your phones in airplane mode as well. And sometimes that can have a significant effect. Usually when we just reducing something called body voltage in a room, which includes turning off the breakers to a room and maybe other circuits in the home, that alone has a significant increase in people's quality of sleep. So I've gotten calls, the next day after I've shown them how to do this, and they said, "Wow, I've never slept so well." And most homes, at least one person in the home has a significant increased quality of sleep just based on that one thing of turning the breakers off. So
it's good for everybody.
Yeah, I was wondering about the three big.
Yes. So You were saying most of the EMF damage that we're exposed to is within our homes. So if there were 3 things that you would recommend that we change or turn off, what would the big 3 be?
Yeah, so just keeping it really simple is it's specifically around nighttime exposures. That's when our body rests, recovers, and repairs. And that's where we see the biggest gains on people's health. So if I were to say 3 things for people to do is before they go to bed is 1, to unplug everything in your home, just as a catch-all.
In your home?
In your home. Yep, just unplug everything that you can. I leave the fridge on. I leave some system critical things, but like TVs, for example, right? They can be putting off dirty electricity even on standby. So I want them unplugged. I want computers shut down. Even desktop computers can have a bad power supply, or they could have Wi-Fi emitting on it and you don't even know. So I'd like to shut down and unplug most things in your home. So
But
that's
if
one
you turn
thing.
off the breakers, then everything's shut down. You don't have to unplug then.
That's true. So most people just shut off breakers to the bedrooms. They don't shut off the power to the whole home. You know, people like Dietrich Klinghardt, he turns the whole power off to his whole house. He has this fridge that can hold it stays cold for more than 8 hours. So that's what he does. But in general, yeah, turn the breakers off to the bedrooms, unplug everything else in your home. That'll take care of the wireless technology that you may not know that is actually transmitting. And then just turn all your portable devices, such as your cell phones and stuff like that, put those in airplane mode, or better yet, just turn them off if you can. So those are kind of just the general catch-all things that everybody could do, kind of at a simple level.
So I'll ask a realistic question from our point of view as a clinic owners. Okay, most of our patients are not very happy to make any changes in their life. Okay, it's very difficult for them to create a change. So anything, even a small thing like, change your bulb is like, oh, why do I need to change my bulb? I just got a new one yesterday. So like if they would follow this, closing the electricity, shutting the phone, doing all these things that you recommend, would they expect to see any realistic or noticeable difference in a relatively short amount of time? Or it's like, oh, you will see the difference in 50 years from now?
Yeah, so a good period of time is 2 weeks. Some people notice it immediately. Some people will notice their quality of sleep increase immediately, but a 2-week period is kind of the time in which things kind of settle out. So the other thing you have to be a little bit concerned about is if somebody follows all these recommendations to a T, and for example, they have a lot of heavy metals in their body, what happens is the detox enzymes in their body just go bananas and start detoxing the body really rapidly. So if you went into a pristine, no EMF environment and you have heavy metals in your body and you're toxic, your body will start removing those extremely rapidly. So you have to support them from a detox mechanism. Some people feel quite crummy from that. So, whatever protocols you use for detoxing, use that to help support them through that. Because some people feel really terrible when they start doing this. If they remove all the wireless from their home, de-energize the home at night, and don't have any external influences, it just allows the body to rapidly heal, but it has a healing crisis. Yeah. So you just have to be particularly careful about that. But usually the 2-week period is a period where you'll see significant changes.
That's good. Right.
Yeah.
And can I just ask you, is it true that cactuses absorb EMF?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So what we do know is there isn't actually very much that actually absorbs radio frequency radiation. One of the few things that does is water. We're made of water, so we absorb it. We know that when there's trees and the leaves are out on the trees versus if the trees drop their leaves, more radio frequency radiation comes through the trees when they have no leaves versus when they have leaves. So we know water absorbs radio frequency radiation. So if cactuses, they kind of like to store water, right? So maybe it does absorb some based on that single fact. I haven't actually read it or tested it, but when I saw that, I was like, you know, cactuses store water. It's
it could
possible. I don't know what the practical application of that would be, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to ponder.
So Mitch, in a country like Israel, when we have sea available for most of the year, is being in the sea or grounding would help us to release some of the EMF that we accumulate or anything like this, or it doesn't have any difference?
Yeah, so earthing and grounding is I think everyone agrees who looks at it that earthing in the sea or in the middle of a forest or somewhere outside of energized society, everyone kind of agrees that that is a good thing. So essentially what happens is it has a huge impact on reducing inflammation in the body. So the free radicals in your body are a positively charged entity. The negative electrons from the earth flow into you and quench the free radicals, essentially. So it has a huge antioxidant effect. So Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt has stated that you know, the effect of sleeping in a properly earthed environment is the same equivalent of getting a 50-gram vitamin C IV every night from an antioxidant level. So it's quite significant that way. But when you bring in this earthing concept into an energized environment, that's where it gets messy. And yeah, walking on the beach, the salt water of the ocean, right, is very conductive, and it's it has an earthing quality to it. So the electrons will flow through the water, through the ocean water, and into your body. So it doesn't really remove the effect of electromagnetic fields, but we know electromagnetic fields increase oxidative stress. Oxidative stress creates free radicals. Earthing quenches free radicals, so it should be a good solid practice. What happens when we bring in these earthing sheets into an electrified environment is the electric fields, for example, coming in from the live wiring in your wall tend to be attracted to the earthed sheet and pass through you. So it kind of increases your exposure from that. So if you're going to use an earthing sheet inside of a home, kind of the best practices are to de-energize the room if you're going to be earthing at night, for example. You also want to reduce the electric fields and magnetic fields and the radio frequencies in that room. And you want to earth it to outside, not to the third prong of your outlet. I'm not sure what the grounding system is in Israel, but a lot of the time the grounding systems can be corrupted. So oftentimes it's better to ground outside. But if you're in a city, there's a lot of ground current that's potential. So it just gets a little messy doing it inside your home. So oftentimes I just get people to use the best practices, ground it to outside, not the third prong, de-energize your room, make sure most of the other electromagnetic fields are fairly low. And when we test this, we test for microamps. We want to make sure that there's less than 18 millionths of an amp flowing between you and the earth, and that's the AC current. And if it's higher than that, it's actually a carcinogenic level. It's a very low amount.
And how do you test for that?
It's a multimeter, and you need a multimeter that measures microamps, essentially. And there's different qualities and different things, but that's essentially what you're looking for. And if it shows anything higher than 18 microamps is known as a human carcinogen, and it doesn't take much to get up to that level, especially if you have dirty electricity in the home. I know Safe Living Technology sells a body voltage kit that has a microamp setting on it, I believe. So something like that would work.
Would you have on your website a recommendation of what kind of meters you should buy?
You know, my general recommendations for kind of everyday kind of use is, you know, they're going to tell you whether your situation's getting better or worse. They may not give you an accurate number, but they'll tell you if there is an exposure and if it's getting better or worse. So I like the Safe and Sound. There's a Safe and Sound Classic, which just has lights on it, and a Safe and Sound Pro meter. And they're really good for radio frequencies. They have the widest band available, and they're really simple to use. They have an on-off switch, and they have a sound feature, which allows you to hear the Wi-Fi in the background or Bluetooth and those type of things. When it comes to magnetic fields, you know, the Tri-Field TF2 is a really good 3-dimensional magnetic field device. And then when it comes to electric fields, I recommend getting a body voltage test kit, for example, from Safe Living Technologies. And what they do is it just measures your body voltage. And you want to keep that under 100 millivolts. And that's an indirect measurement of electric fields. And then as far as the dirty electricity, there's dirty electricity meters from Greenwave, from Stetzer, or Alpha Labs. They'll all kind of get you a similar result for that. So those are kind of the ones that I recommend, that are really easy to use, and you don't need to know a lot about, you know, the type of measurements and the details of it.
You need 4 different devices.
Yeah,
EMF
yeah. When I go into people's homes, you know, they're one environment may be really clean and they don't need to look at that one any further. For example, body voltage and electric fields are pretty static in a home. They don't change because it's based on the voltage of the home. The voltage of the home doesn't change. It's set at a 240 or 120 volts. So usually the body voltage one isn't one that I recommend when I go to clients' homes because it doesn't change all that much. But magnetic fields and the RF ones can change, and the dirty electricity can change as well. So yeah, it's I wish it was simpler, but it's not.
Our clinic is 5 kilometers away from the airport, and we're quite concerned about this, as well as there are many army bases in Israel. Can you speak to the effects of RF in terms of, well, first of all, how you measure it and what we can do about it?
Yeah, so yeah, when it gets into with airports, one of the main concerns with airports is the airport radar. So for international airports or major airports, military bases may have them as well. They have a radar dish basically that swivels around. You know, it's common for it to send out pulses every 4 seconds. Sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's faster. And those are meant to detect airplanes quite far away. So it has a long range. So where I'm at in Calgary, for example, if I'm line of sight to the airport, if I can see the airport control tower, for example, I'm picking up the airport radar for sure. And this could be like 30 kilometers away. And it's of levels that are somewhat significant. So if you're line of sight, can you see the airport from where you are, or is there a hill?
We cannot see, but there are buildings and trees and etc. But we know where it is. We know it's there.
Yeah. And is there a hill between you and the airport at all, or is it fairly flat?
No, it's just buildings and
It's fairly
trees or
flat.
vegetation.
All right. Okay. So it's nice that there's buildings in front of you. If there are tall trees in front of you, that's going to help, or is it's going to bounce and ricochet off of a lot of things. So it's just a strong signal. You're 5 kilometers away from it, depending on the type of radar that they have. Your best chance of picking up airport radar is with the safe and sound, whether the classic or the pro. And if you put it onto the sound setting, what you're going to do is you're going to hear a click sound, and it's going to be a very sharp click, and it's going to be very periodic. It's going to be once every 4 seconds, once every 10 seconds, or something to that effect. And if you basically turn the whole power off your home and you're still hearing this sound, it's a fairly good indication that it's the airport radar. Could be a smart meter as well. They have similar sounds, but they're different. But if it's periodic, and if you go closer to the airport and the signal gets stronger and it's still every 4 seconds, that's a really good indication of your exposure to airport radar.
And what can you do about it?
Right. So if you're concerned about the airport radar, typical things, without knowing what the actual frequency is of the airport radar, most of them are in the gigahertz range, like 1 gigahertz to 3 gigahertz, somewhere in there. Some of them go up higher, but solutions are there's Y-shield paint for painting walls, so you can paint the exterior of the building. Metal roofs will help. It's a little bit of an angle game as well, where it's coming from, but paint. So if you paint the outside of your home, you may have to put window film or a fabric called Swiss Shield Naturel as curtains on your windows. For roofing, there's metal roofs that you can get, or you can put a metal mesh or a metal foil on the inside of the roof, depending on the structure of the roof. And then basically what we're trying to do is we're just doing a reflection principle. We're just trying to reflect the airport radar away from you. So when you do this, if, for example, if you're to paint the outside of the clinic, for example, any Wi-Fi that's inside the clinic will be amplified. It won't get out. It's going to be reflected back in. So it's a double-edged sword. And if you do any shielding, you should take a measurement before and after to actually verify that it's actually doing what it's supposed to. So that's it's just again, I wish it was simpler, but it's not.
Mitch, do you remember the story you just explained us or told us about this client of yours who were living in the end of the field? They had this tower, and the antenna was going to the side, and therefore it didn't affect them. Isn't the same logic would work with a radar, that it would normally go to where the airplane will be and not down to the ground where people will be? Would not be more efficient going up somewhere?
Yeah, it is probably directed, the dish is probably tilted up as it swivels. But yeah, and the places like Calgary, where I live in Calgary, Canada, the airport is down at the bottom of a bowl, and part of the city rises up from there.
Okay.
Right. And where I pick it up 30 kilometers away is they are elevated probably 800 meters above the airport. So you are correct that, if there's probably a pretty good chance, if you're level with the airport radar and you're 5 kilometers away, you may not pick it up, right? If the dish is pointed up. If you're up on a hill, right, and the airport is below you, right, chances are you're going to get a stronger signal. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For protection for yourself, what are your thoughts about bee propolis?
Yeah, when my background's in electrical engineering, so I don't have a huge medical background. So the interesting thing about Dr. Klinghardt is, so his is clinical observations, and I always weight things quite highly when it comes to clinical observations. And he's been dealing with EMFs for over 40 years, right? He's been grounding people for over 40 years. He's been installing dirty electricity filters for over 10 years, and sees the clinical benefits from doing so. So when he says, you know, he uses rosemary tincture, he uses high dose chlorella, he uses propolis, you know, and different products. And I've worked with some of his clients before. So, you know, I put a lot of weight into clinical observation and clinical experience. And I do trust what he's doing.
There are many like things like, I don't know if you can see something like this.
Okay.
Like all kind of EMF protector. They are like, the internet is full of different kind of EMF protector from all kinds. Do you believe in it, or would you have anything that you would recommend as actually doing something?
Yeah, so a lot of those, we call them like subtle energy devices. There could be harmonizers or pendants, and those type of things. And what those work on is on an energetic level, right? And they're trying to support your body to deal with the electromagnetic fields, right? They're not actually protecting you from the electromagnetic fields. If I were to measure using my instruments, which are based in physics, right? If I were to measure the effect of whether you're having a pendant on or not, my meters would show exactly the same numbers. So your exposure is the same, right? It's just trying to help your body deal with the exposure. But what we find is using these things as a long-term strategy, this is my personal opinion, is not a good strategy. It's kind of like keep taking Tylenol for your headache. If you're not actually dealing with what the root cause of the headache is, after a while that Tylenol just won't work, right? And that's what we find with these harmonizers and these subtle energy devices is people notice a difference at the beginning, but after a period of time they don't. You know, we kind of want to deal with things at the root cause level, and EMFs is at a physics level, and all these other things are at an energetic level, right? And you always want to deal with things at the root cause. So,
including all these minerals and stickers that you put on your phones and stuff like this, it's all.
Yeah. The people who do what I do for a living often slam these things. And I'm a little bit more open-minded where, you know, if somebody uses this to help them feel better, to move them to the next healing level, then I'm all for it, right? And if I go into somebody's home and I see these things, you know, I just explain it plainly that, you know, I just want you to be clear that this isn't protecting you from electromagnetic fields. It's just trying to help your body deal with it. But if you don't deal with the root cause of what's causing it, you know, you ultimately aren't any better off in the long term. It's just not a long-term strategy. It's a short-term strategy in my mind.
Great. That was amazing. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I'm going to let you get on with your life.
Yes.
I just want to thank you very much. And I want everyone to know that if they want more information, your website, which is emfaware.ca, is amazing. It has a free EMF questionnaire so that you can assess your symptoms and see if EMF is affecting you. I really like that a lot. The resources you have are amazing, very informative, based on science, and a lot of great videos as well. So there's a lot of great information on your website. So
awesome. Yeah, there's a newsletter as well if people want to sign up for that, where I kind of send out different things on a monthly basis. I try to include an actual EMF comic or joke in there just to lighten the tone. But yeah, that's if people want to stay in touch and keep up to what the latest information is, that's one way to do it as well.
That's great. Thanks.
Thanks for taking the time. Yeah, it's been great.
Really awesome.
Okay.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye guys. Take care.
Thanks
You
very
bet.
much. Bye.
Bye.